Hello everyone, and welcome to Uncivil Law. For today's case from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, we have the case of Trent Taylor versus Robert Stevens and other wardens of various prison facilities. This is a case from the Fifth Circuit and deals with Mr. Taylor being kept in facilities that were, to say the least, unsanitary and probably not fit for human habitation. The issue here is whether or not he has any relief for the conditions in which he was being kept in jail. So we're going to read a little bit about the facts of the story in terms of the conditions that were apparent, and we're going to read a little bit about the law that applies, and ultimately the issue of if there's any liability under 1983 for this. So let's get started with this. Trent Taylor, a Texas inmate, sued Robert Stevens and others over 42 U.S.C. 1983 for violating his Eighth Amendment rights. At the time of the event, the defendants were prison officials at the Montford Unit of Texas Department of Criminal Justice. In his complaint, Taylor contends that he was forced to reside in two unconstitutionally unkempt cells for 6 days. The defendant for the claim asserted qualified immunity and moved for a summary judgment, which the district court granted. We affirm because though there are factual disputes as to the violation, the law was not clearly established. Now we have to read a little bit about the conditions that allegedly applied to Taylor's imprisonment in his time in jail. So let's read on. Taylor stayed in the first cell starting September the 6th, 2013. He alleged that almost the entire surface, including the floor, ceilings, windows, walls, and water faucet, were covered with massive amounts of human excrement that emitted a strong odor. A day later, on September the 11th, Taylor was moved to a seclusion cell, but its condition were no better. It did not have a toilet, water fountain, or a bunk. There was a drain in the floor where Taylor was ordered to use. The cell was extremely cold because the air conditioning was always on, and the cell was anything but clean. The district court granted summary judgment on the basis of qualified immunity. The court held that because Taylor was exposed to the paltry cell conditions for only a matter of days, there was no constitutional violation under Davis v. Scott, and that Taylor had not shown that he had suffered any injury. So now we have to discuss what the standards are that apply to a person being held in prison or jail. What kind of facilities need to be available to them. So let's read on a little bit more about the legal background. The Eighth Amendment does not mandate comfortable prisons, but neither does it permit inhumane ones. At a minimum, prison officials must provide humane conditions of confinement and ensure that inmates receive adequate food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. They cannot deprive prisoners of basic elements of hygiene or minimalized civilized measure of life's necessities. Prison conditions cannot inflict wanton and unnecessary pain. Filthy and unsanitary cells can violate the Eighth Amendment. A dirty cell does not automatically violate the Constitution, however. A filthy, overcrowded cell might be tolerable for a few days and an intolerably cruel for weeks or months, citing a United States Supreme Court case. Heeding that instruction, we've held that a prisoner's 3-day stay in a cell smattered with human elements does not offend the Eighth Amendment, at least where the prisoner was given a chance to clean the cells. So the United States Supreme Court is saying when it comes to the cruel and unusual provisions of the Eighth Amendment, that time is a relevant factor here. So it might depend in part on how long you're being confined in this environment, whether it was a matter of a few days or a much longer time period. And something that's tolerable for a short period of time might be cruel and unusual for a much longer period of time. And so you have to reach that issue. And so if there is a problem, time is a factor, and also the ability for the prisoner to be given the tools necessary to clean the facility are also a factor that might be relevant. The first qualified immunity prong requires Taylor to show his constitutional rights were violated. Because this is a 1983 Eighth Amendment claim at summary judgment, Taylor must show genuine factual disputes about whether the defendants denied him minimal civilized measure of life's necessities and put him at substantial risk of serious harm, and whether defendants were deliberately indifferent to the risk. Under our case law, Taylor succeeds. So as to the first element of qualified immunity, the defendant is winning. It's saying, look, there was definitely a problem here, and that there is a sufficient injury as to that element of qualified immunity. So let's read on a little bit more. Taylor has created genuine factual disputes on the subjectively deliberate indifference prong of the Eighth Amendment claim. Deliberate indifference is an extremely high standard to meet. A prison official displays deliberate indifference only if he knows the inmates face a substantial risk of serious bodily harm and disregards that risk by failing to take reasonable measures to abate it. Taylor repeatedly alleges the defendants knew the cells were covered in human matter and that they had an overflowing drain in his cell. The risk posed by the exposure to this was obvious, and the risk was especially obvious in this case as the defendants forced Taylor to sleep naked on the floor that was so saturated. Taylor had also alleged defendants failed to remedy the paltry conditions, so had shown factual disputes on deliberate indifference. In sum, Taylor has met his burden at the first qualified immunity prong to show his rights were violated. So again, the court is saying that the conditions were so bad that this qualifies as at least an arguable Eighth Amendment violation if the facts are ultimately proven to be what they are, because we're here on a summary judgment standard, so all the facts are being assumed in light of the person who is appealing, in this case, the prisoner. So the court is assuming all these facts are what they are. They haven't been shown to be this, but he's saying they've made a colorable argument that they are. You'd ultimately have to show it, but if you could show it, it would be enough to show there was a problem. So is that enough to gain a recovery? The second prong of the qualified immunity question asks whether the right was clearly established at the time of the violation. In this case, the law was not clearly established. Taylor stayed in his dirty cell for only 6 days. Though the law was clear that prisoners couldn't be housed in cells teeming with problems for months on end, we had not previously held a time period so short violates the Constitution. That dooms Taylor's claim. Indeed, the ambiguity in the case law was apparent even in dicta from the Supreme Court, which instructed that a filthy cell might be tolerable for a few days and intolerably cruel for weeks or months. The state was not on fair warning that their specific acts were unconstitutional. So here the Fifth Circuit is taking notice of the Supreme Court's prior language and saying that we had not previously said that such a short time period was a violation. So even though on the factual record you can make the claim that this was a violation of the Eighth Amendment, under a 1983 claim you cannot show it was previously established. As a result, there is no liability here under 1983 for deprivation of rights by a state because it was not clearly established at the time of the offense. If the prisoner caused some sort of disease, would he have a better claim? Probably not. Probably not, because it just goes to his injury. I mean, unless you could show that like the prison guards were hoping for that result. Like if you could show that, like, you know, as they were being thrown into the cell, they were saying words to the effect of, you know, we hope you catch some horrible disease, then I think yes. But if it's just mere negligence and happenstance, no. So, you know, if you could show like that additional element of malice, like it basically makes a difference of, did we throw you into this cell because it was available, or did we throw you into this cell specifically because we knew about the conditions in here and we're deliberately trying to hurt you? That takes it from a negligence or reckless conduct into some sort of more intentional conduct. And I think that mens rea difference would be enough to change the result if you could show that. So that might change here. Yeah, so that's possible. Accordingly, Taylor has not met his burden to overcome qualified immunity on his cell condition claim. Though he showed genuine disputes about the constitutional violation, the law was not clearly established. We therefore affirm the summary judgment on that claim. So that is the end of the case of Trent Taylor versus Robert Stevens and others, various prison officials in this prison in Texas. In this case, we learned that Trent Taylor was kept for some period of time in jail facilities that apparently breached basic standards of human decency in terms of how they were kept. And Trent Taylor has brought a complaint that his rights were violated because of the conditions in which he was kept. The court found that the factual allegations are sufficient to show a violation of rights. However, under the case law that applied at the time, this had not been well established because the Supreme Court had said that certain conditions which could be bearable for a few days might be intolerable and unconstitutional for longer periods of time. And as a result here, there is no recovery that's available because it was not clearly established, which is one of the prongs of the 1983 violation. So unfortunately, there is no recovery to Mr. Taylor under these circumstances, and that is the end of this case. Thank you for joining me as we both read this case together and now better understand the law. If you're enjoying this legal education content, please subscribe to this channel. It really helps us grow. And check out one of our other videos, including the one that's currently being displayed on the thumbnail on screen. Thank you so much for your continued support. And until later, my friends, cheers and goodbye.